Question 468, Caroline.
Thank you, and thank you for your response. In terms of flooding, in February-March 2014, there were 25 continuous days of rainfall, which left the Fire Brigade protecting the Kenley Water Treatment Works in Croydon. Now, I understand they had to use an astonishing 6,870 hours of fire engine time to protect this essential water treatment work. So my question is, given the resources that you had to use just to protect one piece of vital infrastructure, are you confident that you have enough resources to cope with an extreme weather event such as they've seen in Cumbria or Yorkshire recently, with extensive flooding which would be posing a risk to the underground, to electricity substations, as well as water treatment works all at the same time?
The Kenley Water Treatment incident was very interesting in my perspective, because we spent all those hours there protecting a piece of infrastructure that was really the responsibility of the Walkers Company to protect in the first instance. So we was doing something that, you know, obviously with emergency service, so we was there to protect it. But they really should have had systems in place to protect that piece of infrastructure anyway. And certainly they should have had emergency procedures in place that when that incident occurred, they could have brought into place to reduce the amount of time that we were actually in attendance. So that's what should have happened. And there's been a lot of discussions outside after the incident with local authorities and others about the responsibilities of infrastructure providers and their own emergency arrangements for places like that. That said, flooding events on that scale, we did manage to deal with that incident. It was very, stretching, but we did deal with it. But there's also arrangements in place to call on support from elsewhere in the country. And events like the Cumbria floods, or the floods down on the Somerset Flats a few years ago as well, were dealt with by resources from around the country, because it's a national incident. We call it a level 4 type incident, which requires the support of fire and rescue service from all over the country. That said, I think in London we do have a very good flood response, and the equipment we've got is detailed in the answer. That's, I think, to the credit of LFEPA members who have supported an increase in London Fire Brigade's flood response, despite the fact we don't actually have a statutory duty to do so. So I'm really pleased with that. I mean, that's a result of it being assessed as a risk through not only the London Resilience Forum, but also through our integrated risk management plans previously. So I think that's to our credit, and we have got a very good provision. That said, the threat of climate change and increase in potential for flooding in the future means that we have to keep that risk under constant review, and we will be bringing forward, as part of LSP 6, some proposals about enhancing still further our flood capability and response. One of those things will be about what we can do in terms of prevention, the role of firefighters during home fire safety visits to actually give advice, etc., about prevention of flooding. But more importantly, and more traditionally in terms of our role, we will be recommending some enhancements in terms of equipment and training for firefighters to make sure we're dealing with the increase in the risk as time goes on.
Can I just pick you up on you were talking about the responsibility for flooding, and saying it was the water treatment company that should have been responsible. If we're talking about a massive flooding event across London, we're talking then about, are you saying then that the underground, the electricity companies, everyone should have their own flooding responses, capability in place? Or do you not think it might be better for us to be like Northern Ireland and Scotland, where the Fire Brigade actually have a statutory responsibility for flooding?
It's an interesting discussion. I think absolutely it should be the responsibility of individual services and infrastructure providers who have their own plans in place. And in fact, that's one of the requirements under the Civil Contingency Act, really. So places like London Underground do have their own flood procedures. They do own their own pumps and that sort of stuff to actually deal with their own premises. And we're an emergency service, so we're there to help out initially until they can get their systems up to place. And also, if the level of the flooding exceeds their capability, then obviously we're there to top that up to continue to make sure we can get London running again. In terms of the statutory duty, there's number of ways of looking at it, actually. One is the statutory duty that's been discussed with government over the last few years is about a statutory duty for rescue from flooding, not dealing with flooding or preventing flooding, but rescue from floods. The other side to that, of course, though, is that under the into the national framework, our integrated risk management plan, we are required to assess all fire and rescue related risks and have strategies in place to mitigate those. And flooding, clearly we have taken that into account already because we have a really good flood provision already. My personal view is that if we had a statutory duty for flooding, it's not really any good having that unless we get additional funding to go with it. Because otherwise we'll be given an additional statutory duty, which we then need to provide for. I think we're doing as much as we can do anyway, but that may then divert us from other things that I think at the moment we're doing, we should be doing in the future. So if a statutory duty comes, it needs to come with extra funding. I think that's the most important part.
Yep.